Welcome once again to Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. I'm your host, Kim Todd, and on Digging Deeper, we have conversations with experts about important landscape topics. Today, we're going to be focusing on the connection between nutrition and gardening. So growing your own food has really been a trend that has grown again in the last decade or a couple of decades. I'm old enough to have remembered when it was not a trend, it's just what you did. And we're seeing a lot of interest in the connection between the nutritional side and the actual gardening side. So Jean Ann and Ann, you come at this from nutrition and the landscape side with tiny humans and teaching and school and all those kinds of things. So talk about that connection between nutrition and the importance of that, especially in locations in the city of Lincoln or Omaha or the country that are either underserved populations or food deserts, or simply people don't know where their food comes from. They think it comes from the grocery store.
Yeah. Well, I think nationwide, when we look at nutrition in our world, we're always really interested in those nutrients of concern. So the dietary guidelines across the nation, we've got vitamins A, D, E, and K, potassium, and then fiber as one of the other pieces there that we're looking at as far as gaps. And then when you throw in what you mentioned as far as food access, that only exacerbates that. So for us, that connection of plants and nutrients is very crucial.
So Anne, from a garden standpoint or a landscape standpoint, how are you going to weigh in on this?
Well, I was actually going to come at it from a parent's standpoint, a gardening parent. So I remember before I even had kids, my brother-in-law told me, oh, my kids were at the grocery store and they were trying to get him to buy this prepackaged snack or whatever. And he said, if you can read that label and tell me what's in it and understand it, then I'll buy it for you. And so I kind of took that to heart. And so when I think about snacks for my kids, I think simple. You know, if you get a snack from your garden, you know exactly what you're getting. So keeping it simple. And also looking for that color in your garden too, which I'm sure, I'm not a nutrition expert, but I know that the more color you have on your plate, the better it can be. And you can get that from your garden.
Which is a really good point, because of course all those antioxidants and all those other interesting nutritional things come with the colors of red and yellow and purple, and I'm not so sure about those white peppers. I think maybe those are maybe a little bit different thing. But so what process do you think about or using when you are working with trying to get people to understand that connection between the nutritional value of a wonderful vegetable or a fruit and their own health?
Well, process, I think, also plays a role in terms of that relationship piece of it too. So thinking about, like gardening is really, one of those very efficient ways that we can incorporate all of those learning pieces there. We can talk about responsibility and cause and effect, and little kids can start to learn what it means to work hard and get hungry and then have something to eat at the same time, right afterwards. So that connection starts to play a role in that. But the nutrient part of it, we can also start to talk about what happens in that process from once a plant is picked, and how things change in nutrient content and how that stays in the older kids.
So staying in the older children and then taking it home, does that work? How well does that work? Or are there improvements? Of course, there are always improvements we can make, but how do we improve that, a small child learning that a midnight snack tomato is actually a really good snack, getting that home so that it's, not buying the can't read the ingredients thing.
I think it's just exposure, right? Exposure again and again and again, starting from young children and going all the way until you're an adult. I mean, I'm a gardener now, and one of my first chores was snapping beans. And I wasn't a gardener when I was a high schooler. I wasn't a gardener when I was in my early 20s, but I have had that exposure and I understand that value. And so I think making sure children of all ages have that helps. I think it's very important.
Yeah, and we're using evidence-based curriculums that have shown that connection of, if the youth is involved in the growing and the planting, not necessarily they're the ones doing it, just some involvement. If they have a trusted adult that's there and they're involved in that process, that they're more likely to try that food. So, kids can go through food JAGs. We know that it takes up to 11 times for some kids to try a food before they feel confident that that's something that they liked. And so that increased exposure to that variety can also play a role.
Yes, I can attest to that. Asparagus is officially being eaten in my house after 4 years. Asparagus will be eaten.
So when my boys were tiny and I needed to pack their food for their daycare, they ate broccoli when they were 2 months old. So of course they eat broccoli now, and maybe it has a different bodily reaction as they're grown men, but they still eat broccoli. So that's a really good point. So you talked about curriculum, Jean-Ann. A little bit more about that. What is the curriculum and how is that being delivered?
So we have some different ones based on ages, and I think that's the most important thing is we work really closely with our horticulturists, our learning child team, and nutrition to identify age-appropriate things that have the exact content that's there and has some experiential learning that's worked into it so that all of those pieces are appropriate.
And the connection between actually that curriculum and fingernails in the soil comes into play with what in terms of your own children or design work or your experience, Anne, as a graduate student working a little bit through this?
I think that the most important piece of that is having the support, like the ongoing adult that is, like you said before, really supporting kids and not putting it all on them. I mean, why would you? You're just setting kids up for failure if you're saying, this is your garden, you take care of it. So making sure you have adults that are really bought into this, they know what they're doing, and they're helping the other adults that are involved and continuing the process.
So do you see if you start children understanding this young, do they develop a passion for it?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot going on in society right now for kids.
Yeah, thanks.
So I think that probably has to be continuously studied based on what else is happening with youth. We know that they establish those healthy habits and health behaviors earlier on. So the more exposure you can get earlier on, that plays a role in their decision-making process and how that health role plays roles.
So talk a little bit then about the challenges associated with school gardens in particular from the get-go. Getting the approvals, getting the understanding, getting the teachers involved in it.
Well, the big part of that is a lot with that support system that's around, and that involves funding, that involves the teachers, that involves the volunteers, and the sustainability plan that's going to be in place. And what are you going to do with the food? So do you have things in place that are appropriate for produce production afterwards? What's going to happen with it? Is it going to be something that is incorporated into the school cafeteria, or is it specifically there for a learning experience? So I think all of that planning has to happen ahead of time, and that sustainability piece with those partners. One of the things we're working on is well-connected communities and that connection of how many collaborators it takes for that to be successful.
It takes a lot of buy-in, again, from the adults in the community, and if it's a priority, it'll happen. And I know a lot of school gardens get started and they might fail or they get forgotten, and I am lucky enough to have master gardeners that help me in the backyard farmer garden, but they also help the school gardens, and there's a particular one that was forgotten and they're working really hard to get it back up and running, and it's taking a lot of people involved to get that going again.
So those of you who are watching us on Facebook, make sure that you give us your comments. Tell us whether you like the direction we're going. Comment on pro, con, on what do you think about nutrition and starting with young children. And of course, that is 6:30 Facebook on NET and on Backyard Farmer. And then it goes up on YouTube. So you get to comment. I guess that thumbs up thing, thumbs down, I don't really understand that at all, but I would say we're all thumbs up, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Anne, you went through an interesting design process.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
So I actually got to take a class that was specifically for designing gardens or outdoor play areas, not playgrounds, outdoor play areas for kids. And it had components of still the typical slide, monkey bars, that kind of thing, but also incorporated a lot of nature-based learning, less plastic, still there, but getting kids exposed to gardening. And it was really cool to see where that had been successful, and the kids would like each get a carrot, everybody had a carrot in their bag at the end of the day, and they were really proud of this food, and they would show their parents. And this was all preschool kind of age, but getting to be a part of that and seeing it actually work and seeing it work really, really well it's really inspiring. And I'd love to see that happen in Lincoln, where there are more trees on playgrounds, there are more shrubs on playgrounds, there are more things for kids to pick up and manipulate, and there are gardens on playgrounds. And even if the kids are just like driving cars through the garden, like that's fine, but they're at least closer to those plants, and they have a better understanding of where food comes from. It does not just appear in the grocery store.
And that's a huge, big point, because especially in a school system where there may or may not be anybody there in the summer, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, I would guess.
Yes.
And Jean Ann, I'm not sure what that means in terms of your research or your working in extension as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've seen is, our role in extension as helping to facilitate those, finding those community champions that are going to be there to help assist that through the process. So if there may have been a teacher who is really strong and able to get it started, and maybe they're not able to be there all summer. So pulling together youth councils or other extension groups that are able to help facilitate volunteers throughout the summer and have that piece there so that they can maintain that. We've got some really great partners that we're working on with farm to school grants. So schools can contact extension to help them get those applications in, and we've got the breadth of knowledge from all of the different program areas that can help in the different ways.
So Anne, since you actually do that management of our garden and make it look absolutely fabulous, what are the challenges that you see from the start with actually producing the food? Not the kids learning that they can eat it or the nutrition side, but
Right.
For kind of a typical school or a daycare, what are the challenges?
Schools are trickier, I think, because of the summer break.
Right.
But there are a lot of schools in Lincoln that have kids there through the summer. They might have a summer program that goes on. But I think the biggest challenge is once you get it started, having people there. You have to have someone there. And so, like you said, the community champion, like that's who you need to get it going. And I think it's also really important to get the principal involved, because if the principal makes it a priority, then it's a priority for all the teachers, and then it's a priority for the parents to be supporting this garden, this learning. That I think is the initial challenge, is getting that buy-in. How do you sell that?
Yeah.
How do you sell that to your community?
Yeah, and there's so many different ways within the school then that they can take that. Like you said, if the principal is supportive, it helps in terms of STEM learning. They can use it to think about what other ways economically can they be selling different pieces. So there's a lot of different courses within the school that can then latch on to those areas.
And we always add the A to STEM
Yes.
because of all that beautiful artistic piece. And, you mentioned the colors. Let's just start with colors and math. And if you have 6 children and 5 tomatoes, who doesn't get a tomato, or who's going to share, that kind of thing. So does it make more sense to garden in the ground at schools or raised beds?
Well, there's a garden at the school that my daughter goes to, and they do a great job. The PTA does a great job of taking care of it, and the teachers do a good job of learning with it. The challenge that I've found out that they are really having is the grounds crew keeps knocking it over with their mower. So
Oh, no.
I think everybody who gets close to that garden needs to be involved and say,
Right.
this is a good thing. You need to help us keep this going and not hurt us. So they have these really nice raised beds. So if any kids are in wheelchairs, they have that accessibility. Whereas if it were in the ground, it would be not as accessible, obviously, but it looks nice. It's easier for them to take care of. They can move those beds around if they need to. It's probably a little bit more expensive, but it's probably worth it. Just if you can get those mowers to stay away from it.
We sort of say keep the mowers away from everything except the
Right.
turf.
Yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
So, my students at one point worked with McPhee, and the first things that they did, it was raised beds, and it was one for each grade level. And so in the summer months, they had a community learning center or club at that point, but each grade level then was proud of, they grew radishes if they were kindergartners, and I don't know what they grew as sixth graders at the time because there was still sixth grade, but again, that buy-in, or not just the children, but the principal and the management staff and everybody who can say, everybody has to eat, let's figure out how we can make this work in our schools. That's pretty fun. So what are the favorite foods? What's the highest nutrition food and what's the favorite food? And maybe they're not the same thing.
Well, I mean, I think, and that's one of the things we've got some community gardens that are one of our SNAP Ed grants has supported throughout the last few years, and it varies from place to place. They really love those dark green leafy vegetables because they can start growing and they can put that in. One of the things that we've been working hard is trying to match different recipes and food preparation skills and techniques to the different plants that they might be growing, ones that they might be new to. So looking at all those. We like the beets that they can get in the ground, the carrots, there's lots of vitamin A and beta carotene there. So tomatoes, all of them, it's that big variety, and I think it comes down to what's kind of the gap in the area, what's missing from where they can't get it anywhere else. So like if they're at a place where maybe they have limited fruits and vegetables within their community, maybe all they have is a corner grocery store and that's it, and they don't have much produce coming in. So it's really working with them closely to see what are the things that are missing out of their produce line at the store or where else they can get it.
You mentioned SNAP, so why don't you tell our audience
so
what that is?
Our Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is through USDA and Food Nutrition Services, and that provides the supplementary nutrition for those who might be at the poverty level or have a large enough family in need. And we're the education component of that. So we are working to help both individuals and communities be able to utilize those SNAP benefits to their most and get the most out of it, as well as change that environment in their communities so that there is a healthier food access or physical activity available to them.
And about safety, food safety and not food security necessarily, but the safety of what is being grown on the school property is, I assume that's high on the list.
Right. So food safety, we certainly work with horticulture in terms of that part of it and what's being used, and then work with individuals as far as how they can keep their food safe once they've picked it.
Which is also a big deal, not that fuzzy stuff on your food unless it's supposed to have fuzzy stuff. So you mentioned dark green leafies, and Anne, we have Malabar spinach, which actually was on Plant of the Week on Backyard last week, and it's in our garden.
Yeah, it's
But you
wonderful.
had a fun comment about how you also tie that to children and gardening.
Yeah, so the leaf is edible, but I think the most interesting part of this plant is it does have a little flower, and it's white and it has a little pink bud on it, and then it turns into this purple berry looking thing, and that berry looking thing has a seed in it, and it'll self-seed and everything, which is great. But I grew it at home last year, and one of them fell on the sidewalk and my son stepped on it, and there was this bright pink spot. left behind. And so we started picking all these berries and we're riding on the sidewalk like it's sidewalk chalk. I got really interested in it because it's really just a beautiful color, and it can actually be used as an alternative food coloring. Not red 40, it's just color spinach.
So you can eat the leaves and you can color with the plant.
And you can color with the plant.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just so cool. I love that thing.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, especially for children, if you can get beyond the fact that it's something they have to eat to something they can enjoy and play with, that's a whole nother ball game. So any resources you want to mention before we close out tonight?
Well, our food.unl.edu website, if you go there, you'll be connected to a wide variety of resources that, whether it's food preservation or food safety, recipes that might tie into it. You can connect to our Growing Together pieces, as well as our Choose Healthy Here and Double Up Food Bucks, so you can find out more information as far as that food access part too.
That's great. So you tell them how to prepare it and we will tell them how to grow it.
Yeah,
in the
find,
backyard farmer.
afford, choose, and use. That's kind of our motto for some of our efforts. And so finding where they can find their food, find afford it. And so some of that affording comes into also growing it as well.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Jean Ann and Ann. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have for Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. You can watch a new Digging Deeper on Facebook every Sunday night at 6:30 p.m. Central. Do not miss Backyard Farmer live every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central on NET. Thanks for digging deeper with Backyard Farmer.